sort of like some bit of misconstrued ideas of like, what cities are. So apparently you don't get any kind of neighbourhoods within cities, right? Coming from Birmingham, when I grew up, we were part of a neighbourhood watch, right? So there's all of his apparent burdens of towns because you can form neighbourhood watches, like in a big city. We think they've massively mischaracterised like how people associate in big cities and what these kind of benefits are. Essentially, you say, well, towns should be fantastic. So without providing any kind of legitimisation as to why a state's burden is now to prop up the middle-class idea of the good life, which is essentially everybody living in towns, as opposed to like actually providing people with higher standards of state facilities, something that is more efficient and effective and just more doable within a city, right? So I'm going to go on and explain all of that, also explaining the idea of like why we have as a state this necessity to coerce people into doing good things sometimes, and why we think that's completely fine. Essentially, we're going to engage on a slightly higher level of analysis and kind of, ooh, there are some good things about living in a small place, right? Okay, so economic burdens, and we can like have like it would be great if cities and companies invested. Great, we think it would be fantastic if private companies invested, but given the motion says that they're just not going to, we don't really think it's our burden to do that. We're fine if there is economic potential in areas for the government to develop those, but in areas like the northeast where those jobs are just never coming back, we think it's fine and the state has the legitimacy and indeed the duty to relocate these people to an area where their lives are going to be better and also it is more beneficial for the state to do so. That's the first thing. Also, training workforce, we do that too, right? They never, as I said, they never give you this analysis as to why these towns and living in these smaller communities is necessarily more beneficial. There's actually based on a whole list of like fallacies. One, this is based on the idea that you cannot form a community within a larger city. Absolute fallacy, right? Notice large communities, I don't know, Irish people in London, or like how state groups like form, like, no, I'm sorry. So like how smaller communities form within a bigger city, like how London has a variety of different characteristics depending on which area you live in. All of the stuff, like, disregarded by all the cities are these big scary things that nobody likes to live in. Right, okay. Secondly, it also kind of gives you the idea that if I come from a particular region, I necessarily ideologically conform to everybody else in that region. Not true, right? That's why there's an actual campaign running in the northeast between the Conservatives and the Labour. The Conservatives are out in force. Durham has a Conservative Welshman, for fuck's sake. Like, you don't necessarily have to confirm. What they're doing is essentially saying that we are not going to give you, we are going to give you the ability to move out of those places to actually fulfill your life. Remember, you can still retain all of the ideological identity when you move to somewhere else. You can form different kinds of communities. You can just do it in a more productive way. Notice also that the analysis that Elise brings you as to how these communities are actually preventing people from moving out because they're psychologically toxic, right? Where you are the third generation of the unemployed in a particular area, where those jobs are not coming back, where the educational standard is far lower than that in a big city. Even notice, like Radio 4 did this wonderful program of like how the education system works, and they actually realised that the worst public schools in London are still better than the public schools anywhere else around the country, right? So the levels of achievement and the levels of attention paid to these pupils are better. They're achieving better. The only difference is that people in London expect more from their public services. We think that that is something that citizens should be able to do from the state. Tell me why that's not so.
Why don't you think we're forcefully relocate everyone to London?
Right, you know what, right? If we could live in an ideal world where it would be possible to efficiently run a state that is an entire city, Singapore, we think that would be right. Okay, so oh my gosh, like cities are effective. They finally realise it, right? We think that would be fine. Considering people have been born into areas where it is fine and they can go about living prosperous lives in those areas, the state has no need, no necessity, absolutely no reason to relocate them. We say that when you are actively acting against your own interests and you're actively acting against the interests of the state because you're forcing us to pay for decisions that you yourself made, notice an active opt-out here, we think it's fine for us to be like, we don't owe you this kind of duty anymore. We think that's all fine. This is a burden on the city. Also notice how I've given you quite a bit of analysis of how cities are just more effective, right? Because more people in one place means it's easier to provide services to that specific thing. It means this is reason why you get high levels of healthcare, why you get more hospitals, more doctors per person, more staff and teachers and training and better roads and better facilities, all of these kinds of things that they just say, well, it's nice to live in a town. Great, plant a few more trees in London, deal with that. Okay, so why a state necessarily has this duty to coerce its citizens? Well, Elise has already given you analysis as to why they're actively undermining kind of the idea of a state in this, right? So we kind of, in states and debate land, we presume everybody's working in the best interest of this state, because a few years ago I did like arguments about the social contract were kind of cool. But we said, like, what we're saying is that because you never necessarily opt into working in that best interest of the state doesn't actually know if you are working in this best interest. We think that a state, as an aggregate of the best interests of people who pay taxes into it, has a duty to perform the best for the aggregate of citizens living in it. Notice how we're not like abrogating any kind of responsibility, because we're funding you to move, right? So we're taking away one of the main reasons why people don't move in the state as well.
Do you think it's fair for the government to blame these individuals for economic problems caused by the government?
Yeah. No. Notice why we're paying them shitloads of money to relocate and train them and give them a better life. Finally, the government is going to step up and do something about it, right? It's like there's no point in me saying, oh, you know, Mrs. Thatcher was a really mean person if I am never getting my job back, if my children are going to be unemployed. Like, characterise all of their ideological fancy-wancies between, like, the actual ideas that the state has the legitimacy to do so, that the state has a necessity to provide the best kinds of services to its people, which it does in a city. Notice how it has a duty to be able to fulfil this idea that if you're actively undermining and opting out of the kind of, like, social net that we provide you, then we don't have to be able to tailor everything to your specific circumstances. The state has a necessity to coerce you because you're not going to leave, because you don't have the money and the economical, you don't have the money to leave under the status quo. You're in a psychologically toxic environment where the opportunity of moving to London never occurs to you. Notice how the majority of people don't make rational decisions on a calculus all the time, right? In our debate, half the people turned up drunk, probably not the rational thing to do, they did it anyway, right? We think that what we're making people do is, not Elise, focus. What we're doing here is making the state actually fulfill its burdens to areas it's neglected for ages and ages. We think this is positive because the state has the legitimacy, it has the duty, and there's so many beneficial things that these people get, regardless, which is why we want you to